Jason Statham leisurely lifted his fork, savoring his favorite steak, when a waitress appeared in front of him, holding a notepad. At first, he didn't pay much attention, just another busy night at his go-to restaurant. But as she spoke, his grip on the fork tightened. "Good evening, sir. Ready to order?" That voice. That familiar voice. Jason looked up, and for the first time in a long time, his heart skipped a beat. It was Stacy. His former right hand. His most trusted assistant. The woman who once handled his toughest business. And now, she was standing in front of him, wearing a waitress uniform. What the hell happened? Jason stared at Stacy, his mind racing. The last time he had seen her, she was handling his business with the precision of a master strategist. Now, she was balancing a tray of drinks, her uniform slightly creased, exhaustion visible in her eyes. "Stacy?" His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp, scanning her face for an explanation. Her grip on the notepad tightened. For a moment, she hesitated, then forced a polite smile. "Good to see you, Mr. Statham. What can I get you tonight?" Mr. Statham? That stung. They had been through thick and thin together, yet she was treating him like a regular customer. "Cut the act," Jason said, lowering his fork. "What are you doing here?" Stacy let out a small sigh, stealing a glance at the manager watching from behind the counter. "I'm working," she replied in a hushed tone. "Just, let me take your order." Jason didn't move. His instincts told him something was off. He wasn't just going to let this slide. "I'll take the usual," he finally said, leaning back in his chair. "And when your shift is over, we need to talk." She gave him a tight nod before walking away, but Jason could see it, the hesitation in her step, the weight on her shoulders. Something had happened to her. Something big. And he was going to find out what. Jason Statham watched as Stacy disappeared into the kitchen, her shoulders tense, her movements robotic. He barely touched his food. Something was off, way off. He leaned back in his chair, scanning the restaurant. The low hum of conversations, the soft clinking of silverware, the faint aroma of grilled steak in the air, it was an ordinary evening for everyone else. But Jason could feel it. The shift in the air. His instincts had never failed him before. He turned slightly, glancing toward the counter where the restaurant's manager stood, thin, slick-haired, and grinning like a man who enjoyed power just a little too much. Every few seconds, his gaze flicked toward the kitchen. Watching. Waiting. Jason's grip on his fork tightened. He had seen men like this before, petty tyrants who got their kicks from pushing people around. He was already starting to hate him. The door to the kitchen swung open, and Stacy reappeared, balancing a tray of drinks. As she moved through the restaurant, her mask of politeness was flawless, but Jason knew how to read the details. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, her steps were too measured, her hands were clenched just a little too tight. Jason had seen her handle negotiations with crime lords, pull off impossible escapes, and keep her cool under gunfire. So why did she look like she was walking on glass? As she passed by his table, Jason spoke low enough for only her to hear. "How long have you been working here?" She didn't pause. Didn't even glance at him. "Jason." "Drop it." He raised an eyebrow. "Not happening." Stacy placed a drink on a nearby table and turned slightly, her voice barely a whisper. "Just let it go. Please." Jason's jaw tightened. Not a chance. Before he could press further, a voice cut through the restaurant. "Stacy." "My office." "Now." The entire room went silent for a moment. The manager stood near the bar, arms crossed, his smirk widening. Jason didn't like that smirk. Stacy hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Then, without a word, she nodded and made her way toward the back. Jason watched her go, his mind already calculating. The way she obeyed without protest told him everything. This wasn't a request. It was an order. Jason Statham did not like when people he cared about took orders from cowards. As Stacy disappeared behind the office door, Jason turned his attention back to the manager. The man casually leaned against the counter, tapping his fingers, his expression smug. He was enjoying this. Jason had seen that look before, on men who thought they had control, who thrived on making others feel powerless. Jason had broken men like that before. He shifted his gaze toward the bartender, who had been watching the exchange closely. The man was young, maybe mid-20s, with a nervous energy that didn't sit right. Jason gestured for him to come over. The bartender hesitated, then approached. "Something I can get you, sir?" His voice was steady, but Jason saw the flicker of unease. Jason leaned forward. "That manager always talked to his staff like that?" The bartender swallowed. "Look, man. I just make drinks." Jason studied him for a moment, then smirked. "And I just eat steak." The bartender sighed. "He's a control freak. Likes to push people around. Stacy, she doesn't take crap from anyone, but she's been different since she started." Jason's eyes darkened. "Different how?" The bartender lowered his voice. "Like she's scared of something." Jason had heard enough. Jason didn't hesitate. He stood up, slipping past tables with the smooth confidence of a man who had never been told no. The office door was slightly open. The voices inside were low but sharp. "I don't care what you think, Stacy." The manager's voice was smug, dripping with condescension. "You're lucky I gave you this job." Jason's fingers curled into fists. "Just do your work, keep your mouth shut, and maybe you'll last here longer than the last one." Jason's patience ran out. Without knocking, without warning, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The manager looked up, startled. Stacy's eyes widened slightly. Jason gave them both a calm, almost friendly smile. "Hope I'm not interrupting." The manager's smugness faltered for a split second before he composed himself. "Sir, this is a private." Jason held up a hand. No. Don't mind me. Just figured I'd come see how my favorite waitress is doing." The manager's eyes narrowed. "Stacy is working." Jason took a slow step forward. "That's so? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're lecturing." The manager stiffened. "With all due respect, Mr. Statham, this is none of your concern." Jason let the silence stretch just long enough to make the man uncomfortable. Then, with a smirk, he pulled up a chair and sat down. "See, here's the thing, I don't like the way you talk to her." The manager scoffed. "And I don't like customers telling me how to run my business." Jason chuckled. "Well, the difference is, I don't care what you like." The air in the room changed. Jason wasn't raising his voice. He didn't have to. But the weight behind his words hit like a hammer. The manager swallowed, shifting slightly. Jason leaned forward, his voice dropping to something cold. "You're gonna do me a favor. You're gonna walk out of this room and never talk down to Stacy again." The manager hesitated. Jason's smile faded. "Because if you don't, I promise you, your life is gonna get very complicated." The silence was deafening. Finally, the manager forced a chuckle, trying to act unfazed. "You think you can intimidate me?" Jason tilted his head. "No. I know I can." The manager licked his lips, looking at Stacy, then back at Jason. He was calculating. Jason sighed. "Listen, mate. I don't want to make a mess of your nice little office. But if you don't start showing some respect, I might have to." The manager exhaled sharply. "Fine. Whatever." Jason stood up. "Good talk." Stacy shot him a really? "Look!" He just smirked. As they walked out of the office, she muttered, "You didn't have to do that." Jason chuckled. "Yeah, I did. But this wasn't over." because Jason still didn't have all the answers. And he never left a job unfinished. Jason watched Stacy move through the restaurant, her posture stiff but composed. She took orders, smiled at customers, and carried plates with the efficiency of someone used to handling high-pressure situations. But he knew better. This wasn't her world. As she disappeared into the kitchen, Jason leaned back, sharpening his focus. Something was wrong. Stacy wasn't the type to crumble, but the tension in her shoulders told him she was barely holding it together. He glanced toward the counter where the restaurant's manager, a thin man with slick back hair and a smug expression, was speaking to a bartender. Every now and then, his eyes flicked toward the kitchen, a smirk curling his lips. Jason's jaw tightened. A few minutes later, Stacy returned with his plate, setting it down with practiced precision. She barely looked at him. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "Jason, don't." Her tone was firm, almost pleading. "Just enjoy your dinner." His fingers tapped against the table. "Not happening. I want answers." Before she could reply, the manager's voice cut through the restaurant. "Stacy! My office. Now." She flinched, her jaw clenching for a fraction of a second before she nodded and walked toward the back. Jason didn't like this. Not one bit. Without hesitation, he dropped his napkin onto the table and got up. If that manager thought he could talk down to Stacy like that, he was about to learn a painful lesson. Jason Statham was not the kind of man to sit back and watch. Jason Statham sat back down at his table, but his mind wasn't on his steak anymore. He kept his eyes on the office door, watching as Stacy walked out. She didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge him. But Jason wasn't fooled. Her movements were too stiff, her steps too precise, like someone trying too hard to act normal. He had seen that walk before. The walk of someone trying not to crack. She picked up an empty plate from a nearby table, nodded at a customer, then disappeared into the kitchen. Jason exhaled slowly. He needed to know exactly what was going on. The restaurant kitchen was a controlled mess, chefs shouting orders, steam rising from sizzling pans, knives chopping with mechanical efficiency. Jason stepped through the swinging doors, blending into the movement of the staff. He moved like he belonged there, because when Jason Statham wanted to belong somewhere, he did. He spotted Stacy near the back, stacking plates near the dishwashing station. She felt his presence before she even turned around. "Jason," she muttered under her breath. "You're not supposed to be back here." "Good thing I never cared about supposed to," he said, leaning against the counter. She sighed, keeping her voice low. "What do you want?" "Answers," Jason replied simply. Stacy hesitated. Then, under her breath, she muttered, "Not here." Jason followed her gaze. Two other employees were watching them. One was a tired-looking cook. The other? A waiter pretending to wipe a glass but definitely eavesdropping. Jason gave a slow nod. "All right. But I'm not leaving without them." 20 minutes later, Jason stood outside the back entrance of the restaurant. The alley was dark, lined with crates and a dumpster that smelled like bad decisions. A single flickering light buzzed overhead. Stacy stepped out, arms crossed. "I don't know why you're doing this," she said. Jason tilted his head. "Because you're in trouble." She let out a short laugh. "That obvious?" Jason didn't smile. "Yeah." Stacy looked away. "I didn't want you involved." "Well, that ship sailed," Jason said. "Talk." She hesitated, then finally exhaled. "I owe someone. Someone powerful. And he made sure I ended up here." Jason's jaw tightened. "Who?" Stacy hesitated. Then, "Victor Hale." Jason's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes darkened. "Bad news," he muttered. "Yeah," Stacy said. "Really bad." Victor Hale wasn't just a name. He was a whisper in dark corners. A power broker. A man who didn't take no for an answer. Jason had never met him directly, but he had cleaned up enough messes left in Hale's wake to know exactly the kind of man he was dealing with. "Tell me everything," Jason said. Stacy exhaled. "I used to work for him, before you. Small jobs at first, but then I got too close. I saw things I wasn't supposed to." Jason nodded. "And now he wants something from you." She nodded. "But I don't have it." Jason studied her. "He thinks you do." Stacy clenched her jaw. "And now he thinks you do, too." Jason smirked slightly. "Then he's got a problem." The sound of a car engine growling at the end of the alley made both of them turn. A black sedan, its windows tinted too dark to see inside, slowed down. Jason's entire body went on high alert. "Friend of yours?" he asked. Stacy swallowed. "I wish." The sedan rolled to a stop. The driver's window slid down an inch, just enough to see a flash of a cigarette ember. Jason subtly shifted his stance, preparing for whatever was coming. A voice drifted from inside the car. "Stacy, you know better than to have conversations like this." Jason's smirk faded. "A message. A warning." The window rolled up. The car pulled away. Stacy let out a breath. "And that is how Victor Hale plays the game." Jason watched the taillights disappear. "Good. Then I know exactly what kind of game I need to play back." Jason had made a career out of surviving dangerous men. But Hale? Hale was different. He wasn't just another street thug or crime boss. He operated in the shadows, pulling strings from places no one could see. And now he had his sights set on Jason. Which meant Jason had two options. Walk away. Let Stacy handle it herself. Handle it his way. Jason never liked option one. He turned to Stacy. "You're not handling this alone." She shook her head. "Jason." "No," he said firmly. "This guy thinks he owns you? He's about to find out what happens when he plays with the wrong people." Stacy hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. "All right," she said. "But if we do this, we do it smart." Jason smirked. "Always." But in the back of his mind, he knew this wasn't just about Stacy anymore. Hale had put Jason on his list. And when someone did that, Jason made sure he was the last name they ever wrote down. Jason pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He stopped on a name. Mick O'Reilly. An old ally. A wild card. A guy who knew things before anyone else did. Jason hit dial. It rang twice before a rough Irish accent answered. Well, if it isn't Mr. Hollywood himself." Jason smirked. "Mick, I need a favor." A chuckle. "Isn't it always?" Jason's voice hardened. "It's Victor Hale." Silence. Then Mick sighed. "Bloody hell, Jason. You sure you want to start that war?" Jason's eyes darkened. It already started. Jason moved through the restaurant like a shadow, his steps calculated. He wasn't the kind of man who caused a scene unless he had to. But right now, he wanted to see what was happening behind that door. He reached the manager's office, the door slightly ajar. Voices filtered through. "You're lucky I even let you work here," the manager sneered. "You think you can just waltz in here and make demands? You do what I say, when I say it. Got it?" Jason's fingers curled into fists. Stacy's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm just here to work. I don't need problems." The manager chuckled darkly. "Oh, but you are a problem, Stacy. You think I don't know who you used to work for? Guys like Statham don't have assistants. They have fixers. And you? You're just another washed-up has-been trying to keep your head above water." Silence. Jason had heard enough. With a swift kick, the door flew open, slamming against the wall. The manager jumped, his smugness vanishing the second he locked eyes with Jason. "Let's have a chat," Jason said, his voice calm but laced with danger. The manager swallowed hard. "Mr. Statham, this is a private conversation." Jason stepped inside, towering over him. "Yeah? Well, I'm making it public." He turned to Stacy. "You good?" Her eyes darted between them. She let out a slow breath. "Jason, don't." But Jason wasn't about to listen. He leaned in close to the manager, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You see, I don't like bullies. And I really don't like people who think they can push around someone I care about." The manager's confidence shattered. I was just talking to her." Jason smiled. A cold, unforgiving smile. "You were threatening her." "Big mistake." He grabbed the manager by the collar, pulling him in. "Now, you're gonna walk out there and tell your staff how much you appreciate Stacy's hard work. And then, you're gonna keep your mouth shut." The man nodded frantically. Jason let him go, watching as he stumbled out of the office, wiping sweat from his brow. Stacy exhaled. "Jason, you didn't have to do that." He turned to her. "Yeah, I did. Now, you're gonna tell me what's really going on." She hesitated, but Jason wasn't leaving without answers. Jason Statham didn't believe in coincidences. When a black sedan tailed you for precisely long enough to send a message, it wasn't a random event. It was deliberate. Calculated. A warning shot fired in silence. And Jason had never been the kind of man to back down from a warning. As he walked back into the restaurant, his movements were slow, deliberate. Controlled. The same way a predator moves when it knows the hunt has already begun. He locked eyes with Stacy. She shook her head, already knowing what he was thinking. "Jason. Don't." But Jason had already made up his mind. The manager had crossed a line earlier. And Jason had a real problem with people who thought they could intimidate others. Which meant Jason was about to have a little chat with the man in charge. The manager's office door was slightly ajar, just enough for Jason to hear the conversation inside. He heard Stacy's name. Then something that sounded an awful lot like a threat. Jason didn't bother knocking. The door swung open with a controlled force, slamming against the wall with a thud. The manager, a wiry man with slick back hair and an extremely punchable face, jumped in his seat. "What the?" Jason stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Let's have a talk," he said, voice smooth but carrying a dangerous edge. The manager quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair like he wasn't nervous. But Jason saw the subtle tension in his fingers, the twitch in his jaw. "I don't recall inviting you in, Mr. Statham," he said, his tone forced confidence. Jason smirked. "That's funny. I don't recall needing an invitation." The tension in the room shifted. The manager's eyes flicked to a small security camera in the corner. Jason followed his gaze. "You think that thing's gonna help you?" The manager didn't answer. Jason reached into his jacket pocket. The manager flinched. Jason pulled out his phone. Held it up. Click. He took a picture of the camera. Then he smirked. "Now it's on my phone too. See? Now we're both recording." The manager swallowed. "I don't know what you think you're doing," the manager said, trying to regain control of the conversation. Jason tilted his head. "Really? You don't?" He leaned forward, placing both hands on the manager's desk. The man shrank slightly. "I think you do know," Jason said. "I think you know exactly what you're doing." The manager cleared his throat. "I don't have to explain myself to you." Jason smiled. The kind of smile that made people nervous. "See, that's where you're wrong." He reached forward, picked up the man's pen, and idly rolled it between his fingers. "Because here's the thing, I don't like bullies." The manager stiffened. Jason flipped the pen once, then stabbed it into the desk, just hard enough to make the man flinch. And right now? You're looking a lot like a bully. The door suddenly opened again, and Stacy stepped inside. Her expression was unreadable, but Jason saw the flash of frustration in her eyes. Jason, stop. He didn't move. The manager, sensing an opening, immediately stood. That's right, Stacy. Tell him. Jason raised a hand, and the manager shut up instantly. Stacy exhaled. This is not how we handle things. Jason turned to her. Then tell me how we do handle things. Because from where I'm standing, this guy thinks he owns you. The manager scoffed. Owns her? Please. Stacy works for me. And she. Jason moved so fast, the manager didn't even have time to react. In one swift motion, Jason grabbed the man's wrist and twisted it just enough to make him wince in pain, but not enough to break anything. The message was clear. The manager froze, eyes wide. Here's what's gonna happen, Jason said, his voice dangerously low. You're gonna apologize. The manager's breathing quickened. Jason twisted slightly. The manager whimpered. Jason smirked. Try again. The man swallowed. I'm sorry. Jason nodded. Good. Now you're gonna keep your mouth shut, your hands to yourself, and you're gonna stay out of Stacy's way. Got it? The manager nodded rapidly. Jason let go. The man staggered back, clutching his wrist, looking at Jason like he was a monster. Jason gave him a slow, amused smile. See? That wasn't so hard. Jason turned to Stacy. Now we're leaving. She didn't argue. Not this time. As they stepped out of the office and into the dimly lit hallway, Jason felt her exhale next to him. Was that really necessary? She muttered. Jason smirked. Probably not. She sighed. But you feel better now? Much. She shook her head, but Jason caught the small smile she was trying to hide. They stepped out of the restaurant into the night air. And immediately, Jason felt it. The same presence. The same shift in the atmosphere. Someone was watching them. Again. Across the street, another black sedan was parked under a street lamp. Engine running. Tinted windows. Jason stared at it. It stared back. Stacy shifted uneasily. That's not the same car as before. Jason nodded. Nope. It's a different one. Her voice dropped. That's not better, Jason. Jason smirked. Maybe not for us. Definitely not for them. The sedan didn't move. Jason took a single step toward it. The car's headlights flicked on, just for a second. Like blinking. Then, slowly, it pulled away and disappeared down the street. A message. Again. Jason exhaled. All right. Stacy frowned. All right, what? Jason cracked his knuckles. It's time to go see Mick. 15 minutes later, Jason and Stacy were in his car, driving through the city streets toward a man who always knew more than he should. Stacy glanced at him. You're not letting this go, are you? Jason smirked. Would you? She sighed. No. Jason's eyes stayed on the road. Then let's get some answers. Because now? This wasn't just about Stacy anymore. This was personal. Stacy exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. Jason could see the weight of something pressing down on her, something she hadn't wanted him to know. You gonna talk, or do I have to start guessing? He asked, crossing his arms. She leaned against the desk, staring at the floor. It's complicated, Jason. I don't do complicated. I do facts. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Start talking. She looked up at him, her guard finally cracking. Fine. You want to know why I'm here? She let out a bitter laugh. Because I had no choice. After I left your world, I tried to go clean. But people don't just let you walk away. Jason's eyes darkened. Who? Stacy hesitated, then said a name that made his jaw tighten. Victor Hale. Jason felt a cold rage settle in his chest. Hale was bad news, a man who operated in the shadows, dealing in debts, threats, and destruction. If he had his claws in Stacy, she was in real trouble. He came after you? Jason asked, his voice dangerously low. She nodded. I owed him. Not money, something worse. He wanted information. Leverage. I refused, so he made sure I had nowhere to go. No job, no contacts, nothing. She gestured to her uniform. This was all I could get. Jason took a deep breath, steadying the fury rising inside him. Hale had made a mistake. You should have called me, Jason said. I didn't want to drag you into it. He smirked, shaking his head. Stacy, you and I both know, if Hale's involved, I was already in it. She looked away, guilt flashing in her eyes. Jason's mind was already working. Hale thought he had Stacy cornered. That was going to change. You're not alone in this, Jason said, his voice firm. We're gonna handle it. But first, I need to know, what exactly does Hale want? Stacy swallowed hard. He wants you. Jason didn't flinch. Of course, he did. Jason Statham drove through the city streets, his mind racing faster than the car's engine. The tension in the air was thick, like the calm before a storm. Stacy sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, staring out the window, her jaw tight. She knew he wasn't going to drop this. And she knew that meant the truth, the whole truth, was about to come out. Jason didn't speak. Not yet. Because right now, the silence was doing all the talking. The car rolled to a stop outside a rundown warehouse on the industrial side of town. The kind of place where people asked fewer questions and counted their money twice. Jason killed the engine and turned to Stacy. Talk. She exhaled, shaking her head. Jason, it's not that simple. Jason smirked. It never is. She hesitated. Then, finally, she spoke. I work for Victor Hale, she said, her voice quieter than before. Before I met you. Before I knew better. Jason didn't react. He just listened. I was young, she continued. And stupid. Thought I could handle myself. Thought I could play the game without getting burned. Jason's eyes narrowed. But you did. She let out a dry chuckle. Oh yeah. I did. She looked away. And now he's back. Jason leaned against the steering wheel, his instincts on high alert. Why? He asked. Stacy hesitated. Then. Because he thinks I still have something of his. Jason's expression didn't change, but inside, the puzzle pieces were snapping together. What? She shook her head. I don't even know. A name. A file. A piece of information that he's convinced I have. Jason's fingers tapped against the steering wheel. And do you? Stacy swallowed hard. I don't think so. Jason smirked slightly. Not good enough. She exhaled. Jason, I swear, if I knew, I would have given it to him a long time ago. Jason studied her carefully. Stacy wasn't a liar. She wasn't stupid. Which meant one of two things. She really didn't know what Hale wanted. She knew, but it was buried so deep in her past that she hadn't put it together yet. Either way, Hale was convinced she was the key. And now Jason was part of the equation. Jason's mind was already moving to the next step. What name? He asked. Stacy frowned. What? You said he's after a name, Jason said. Whose? She hesitated. Then, slowly, she whispered it. Dominic Lang. Jason's entire body went still. That name wasn't just any name. It was a ghost. A myth. A name whispered in dark corners by men who usually didn't live long enough to say it twice. Jason exhaled. Damn. Dominic Lang wasn't a man who existed in the normal sense. No birth records. No financial trail. No fingerprints. And yet, he was one of the most powerful men in the underground world. A power broker. A fixer. A man who knew everything about everyone. Jason turned to Stacy. Why does Hale think you know where Lang is? Stacy rubbed her temples. I don't know, Jason. I swear, I don't. I haven't seen Lang in years. She stopped. Jason caught it. She had remembered something. What? Jason pressed. She shook her head. No. It's stupid. Jason gave her a look. Try me. She hesitated. Then, finally, there was a night. A job. Years ago. Jason leaned in. What happened? Stacy closed her eyes, reaching back into memories she had tried to bury. I was supposed to deliver a package. Simple handoff. But something was off. The guy I was meeting, he wasn't supposed to be there. Jason's pulse quickened. Who was he? Stacy hesitated. Then, Lang. Jason cursed under his breath. Lang had been at the meeting. Which meant Stacy had been closer to the truth than she ever realized. Which meant Hale had been right. She did have something. And now, Jason had it too. Jason leaned back, processing the information. If Lang was there, then that means he was running something through Hale's network. Stacy nodded. Yeah. And whatever it was, Hale never got it. Jason's eyes darkened. Because Lang didn't trust him. Stacy exhaled. Yeah. Jason smirked. Smart guy. Stacy shot him a look. Jason. This is serious. He met her gaze. I know. Because if Hale thought Stacy had the key to finding Lang, then he wasn't just hunting her. He was going to do whatever it took to make sure she talked. And Jason wasn't going to let that happen. Jason pulled out his phone. Stacy frowned. Who are you calling? Jason smirked. A guy who hates Hale as much as I do. Stacy's eyes widened. Mick? Jason nodded. The phone rang twice before a familiar Irish voice answered. If this is about Hale, you're already too late. Jason's grip tightened. What do you mean? Mick sighed. I mean, you and Stacy just landed at the top of his hit list. Jason smirked. Well, that's not new. Mick chuckled darkly. No. But the bounty is. Jason's smirk faded. How much? A pause. Then. 2 million. Stacy went pale. Jason exhaled. Well. That's annoying. Mick sighed. Mate, you better get ahead of this. Because I guarantee you, every hired gun in the city just got the same text. Jason nodded. Then let's make sure we get to Hale before they do. Jason ended the call and turned to Stacy. We need to move. Now. She swallowed. Jason, what if we're already too late? Jason smirked. Then we make sure we go down swinging. Stacy sighed. You always did have a way with words. Jason chuckled. Come on. Let's go ruin someone's night. And with that, they drove off into the night, straight toward the storm. Because this wasn't just a fight anymore. This was war. Jason didn't react right away. He just stared at Stacy, letting her words sink in. Victor Hale wanted him. He let out a slow breath. Yeah? And what exactly does he think I've got that's worth all this trouble? Stacy hesitated. A name. A location. Something he thinks you know. Jason's jaw tightened. And do I? I don't know, she admitted. But he's convinced you do. And if you don't give it to him, he's not just coming for me. Jason leaned against the desk, rubbing his chin. He had crossed paths with Hale before, but never directly. If Hale was making a move like this, it meant he was desperate or dangerous enough to believe he had Jason backed into a corner. Big mistake. Stacy's voice softened. Jason, this isn't just about me. He's watching you. Your routine. Your people. She paused. Your family. Jason's fists clenched. Hale just signed his own death warrant. He straightened up. Where's he now? I don't know, Stacy said. But I know how we can find out. Jason met her gaze. There was the Stacy he knew, the one who didn't back down. He smirked. All right then. Let's go pay an old friend a visit. She raised an eyebrow. Who? Jason grabbed his jacket. A guy who really doesn't like Hale. Jason Statham never minded being a target. It came with the job. With the life. But this time? This time, the entire underworld was looking for him. As he and Stacy drove through the dimly lit streets, Jason could feel the shift. The city wasn't the same anymore. Every shadow could be a gunman. Every car could be following them. Every alley could be an ambush waiting to happen. 2 million, Stacy murmured, staring out the window. That's a lot of incentive. Jason smirked. For amateurs. She shot him a look. Jason. You know every contract killer in the city just woke up to that alert. He nodded. Yeah. And that means they're all making the same mistake. Stacy frowned. Which is? Jason turned the wheel, cutting into an alley, killing the headlights. They think I'm gonna run. Stacy shifted in her seat, scanning the darkness around them. The alley was narrow, walls covered in graffiti, dumpsters lined against the edges. Why are we stopping? She asked. Jason pulled out his phone, scrolling through a secure chat app Mick had set up for them years ago. 3 new messages. Mick, mate, I don't like this bounty. Something's off. Mick, Hale's moving faster than expected. Mick, meet me at the docks. Bring ammo. Jason smirked. Classic Mick. We're meeting Mick, he said, tucking the phone away. Stacy exhaled. So that's the plan? Jason gave her a look. Stacy. We don't have a plan yet. First, we get information. Then, we decide who needs a visit. Her eyes darkened. And by visit you mean? Jason started the car again, reversing out of the alley. Yeah, he said simply. They didn't even make it 5 blocks before it happened. A silver SUV cut across their lane, too fast, too aggressive. Jason's instincts flared. Hold on. He slammed the brakes, twisting the wheel. The tires screamed against the pavement as the car slid sideways. 3 men jumped out of the SUV. Guns raised. Jason only had 1 second to react. He took it. With one swift motion, he kicked the driver's door open, using it as a shield as the first round of bullets tore through the air. Stacy ducked, grabbing the pistol from her holster. Stay low! Jason barked, rolling out of the car as another shot shattered the windshield. One of the gunmen moved too slow, Jason was on him in seconds. A sharp elbow to the throat, a twist of the wrist, and suddenly he had the guy's gun. Jason didn't hesitate. Bang! The second shooter went down. The third tried to run. Jason sighed. Amateur. He sprinted forward, grabbing the guy by the collar and slamming him against a nearby wall. The man gasped, dazed. Jason pressed the gun to his forehead. Who sent you? The man's lip trembled. It's the bounty, man. 2 million. Everyone's after you. Jason's expression didn't change. Not what I asked. The guy swallowed hard. It's Hale. He put the word out. Said anyone who gets to you first gets a bonus. Jason narrowed his eyes. What kind of bonus? The guy hesitated. Jason twisted his grip slightly. Talk. The man exhaled sharply. 5 million. If you're brought in alive. Jason smirked. That's cute. And then he knocked the guy out cold. Stacy stepped beside him. 5 million alive, 2 million dead? Jason nodded. Hale wants to talk. She crossed her arms. That's not good. Jason smirked. For him? No. It's not. 30 minutes later, Jason and Stacy pulled up near the docks, headlights off. Mick was already there, leaning against his battered Land Rover, smoking a cigarette. He flicked it away when he saw them. Well. You two sure know how to cause a mess. Jason smirked. Nice to see you too, Mick. Mick glanced at Stacy. Still keeping him alive? She rolled her eyes. Barely. Mick chuckled, then gestured toward the water. Come on. I got something you'll want to see. They followed him to a small warehouse at the edge of the pier. Inside, a table was set up with photos, documents, and a very expensive-looking laptop. Mick tapped a file. Hale's not just looking for Lang, he said. He's desperate to find him. Jason raised an eyebrow. Why? Mick exhaled. Because Lang has something big on him. Something that could ruin his whole empire. Stacy leaned forward. What is it? Mick shook his head. Dunno yet. But I do know this, Hale's running out of time. He needs that leverage. Jason nodded slowly. Then we take it from him. Jason grabbed one of the documents. A list of Hale's most recent financial transactions. Stacy scanned it. He's moving money fast. Mick nodded. Too fast. He's getting paranoid. Jason smirked. Good. Let's make him more paranoid. Stacy crossed her arms. You're thinking bait. Jason nodded. If he wants Lang that bad, let's give him a reason to think we know where he is. Mick grinned. Oh, I like this plan. Jason looked at Stacy. You in? She sighed. Do I have a choice? Jason smirked. Nope. She shook her head. Fine. Let's make some bad decisions. Jason pulled out his phone, dialing a number from memory. It rang once. Then, a smooth, calculating voice answered. Well. I was wondering when you'd call. Jason's smirk widened. Victor Hale. Silence. Then Hale chuckled. Jason Statham. What a pleasant surprise. Jason leaned against the table. I hear you've been looking for me. Hale's voice was calm. Too calm. Oh, I have. But I didn't expect you to come to me. Jason's smirk didn't fade. Let's talk. Hale exhaled. And what do you have to offer? Jason's eyes darkened. Information. Silence. Then, Hale's voice dropped an octave. About Lang? Jason let the silence stretch just long enough. Then. Maybe. Hale chuckled. You're playing a dangerous game, Jason. Jason's smirk turned into something sharp. So are you. Another pause. Then Hale spoke. Fine. Let's meet. Jason exhaled. Game on. Jason's car weaved through the dimly lit streets, the city's neon glow reflecting in his rearview mirror. Stacy kept glancing behind them, her muscles tense. You're sure we're not being followed? She asked. Jason smirked, keeping his eyes on the road. If we were, they lost me 3 turns ago. Stacy exhaled, but the tension didn't leave her. So, who are we going to see? Jason's grip tightened on the wheel. Mick O'Reilly. Her eyebrows shot up. The Mick O'Reilly? Ex-mercenary, information broker, and all-around lunatic? Jason nodded. That's the one. Great, she muttered. I always love dealing with psychopaths. Jason chuckled. He's not a psychopath. He just enjoys chaos a little too much. Stacy shot him a look. Oh, so that's what we're calling it now? 10 minutes later, they pulled into a rundown auto shop on the outskirts of the city. The sign above it read O'Reilly's Repairs, but anyone who knew better understood that Mick didn't just fix cars, he fixed problems. Jason knocked twice on the garage door. Silence. Then, a loud clang, followed by a gruff Irish accent. If you're selling something, piss off. If you're here for trouble, take a number. Jason smirked. What about an old friend? A pause. Then the sound of heavy locks clicking open. The door creaked, and a man with wild red hair and grease-stained hands leaned against the frame. His sharp eyes flicked between Jason and Stacy. Well, Mick said with a grin. If it isn't Hollywood's favorite tough guy. He tilted his head. And his shadow. Stacy crossed her arms. Nice to see you too, Mick. Mick chuckled. Come on in, then. Let's see what kind of mess you're bringing me this time. Jason and Stacy stepped inside. The garage smelled like motor oil and gunpowder, with old car parts scattered around like forgotten relics. A half-assembled rifle sat on the workbench, next to a stack of unmarked folders. Mick poured himself a drink and plopped down in a chair. So, what's the crisis? Jason leaned against the table. Victor Hale. Mick's grin faded. He took a slow sip, then set his glass down. Well, shite. Jason nodded. Yeah. Mick rubbed his temples. What does that psycho want now? Stacy spoke up. Me. And Jason. Mick let out a low whistle. Hale's got balls. Big, stupid ones. Jason smirked. That's one way to put it. Mick sighed. All right, what do you need? Jason leaned in. I need to know where he is. Mick chuckled, shaking his head. Always straight to the point. He reached for one of the folders and tossed it onto the table. You're in luck. I was already looking into him for someone else. Jason flipped the folder open. Inside were surveillance photos, transaction logs, and a list of recent movements. One address stood out. An abandoned warehouse on the docks. Jason looked up. How recent is this? Mick grinned. Fresh. Less than 24 hours. Jason closed the folder. Then we don't have time to waste. Stacy exhaled. So what's the plan? Jason stood up, rolling his shoulders. Simple. He glanced at Mick. You still got that special delivery service? Mick smirked. Oh, you mean the one that comes in black duffel bags? Jason nodded. Load it up. Stacy sighed. Here we go. Jason grinned. Oh, come on, Stacy. You didn't think this was going to end with just a conversation, did you? Mick laughed, already grabbing his keys. Now this is going to be fun. Jason cracked his knuckles. Victor Hale had made a mistake. And tonight, Jason Statham was going to remind him why. The docks were quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant people were either sleeping or waiting to kill you. Jason Statham preferred the latter. He adjusted the strap of the black duffel bag slung over his shoulder, giving Stacy a quick glance as they moved through the shadows. She was right beside him, silent, focused, ready. Mick had done his part, setting them up with the necessary equipment, because Jason didn't walk into a situation like this empty-handed. Ahead, the abandoned warehouse loomed over the water, its metal walls rusted from years of neglect. A single light flickered above the entrance, and 2 armed guards stood by the door, smoking. Jason smirked. "You take left, I take right?" Stacy sighed. "Just like old times." Jason moved first. Silent, efficient. He grabbed the guard's wrist, twisted it at an unnatural angle, and before the guy could scream, a precise strike to the throat sent him crumpling to the ground. Stacy wasn't far behind. Her target barely had time to react before she drove her knee into his stomach, knocking the air out of him, then sent him to the ground with a precise elbow to the jaw. Jason gave her a nod. "Still got it." She rolled her eyes. "Let's just get this over with." They stepped inside. The warehouse was dimly lit, crates stacked along the walls. At the center of the room, sitting in a leather chair like he owned the place, was Victor Hale. He looked exactly as Jason remembered, slick suit, calculating eyes, the kind of man who smiled before he stabbed you in the back. "Jason Statham," Hale drawled, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Jason smirked. "Well, you did roll out the red carpet. Thought I'd return the favor." Hale chuckled, setting his drink down. "You have something I want, Statham." Jason took a step closer. "Yeah? And what's that?" Hale leaned forward. "A name. A location. You know who I'm after." Jason tilted his head. "And if I don't?" Hale sighed, snapping his fingers. The sound of guns cocking echoed through the warehouse as half a dozen men emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. Jason barely reacted. He just glanced at Stacy. She raised an eyebrow. "Really? This guy?" Jason shrugged. "I know. Disappointing, isn't it?" Hale smirked. "I'd rethink that attitude, mate." He stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "You're surrounded. Outnumbered. And I'm not in the mood for games." Jason exhaled. "You see, Victor, that's where you screwed up." Hale frowned. "How's that?" Jason smirked. "You thought I came alone." Right on cue, the bang of a sniper rifle echoed from outside. One of Hale's men dropped before he even knew what hit him. Chaos erupted. Jason grabbed the nearest thug, using him as a human shield as bullets flew. Stacy ducked behind a crate, pulling a pistol from her holster and firing with deadly accuracy. Hale cursed, diving for cover. Jason moved fast, weaving through the chaos, taking down men one by one. A knife to the leg. A well-placed elbow to the throat. A quick disarm, and suddenly, Jason had a gun of his own. Within minutes, the warehouse was silent. Hale, now alone, stumbled backward, his confidence shattered. Jason walked toward him, gun raised. "You really thought this was going to go your way?" Jason asked. Hale's hands trembled. "Listen, mate, we can talk about this." Jason cocked the gun. "You threatened my people. That was your first mistake." Hale swallowed hard. "And my second?" Jason smirked. "Thinking you could win." A single shot rang out. Hale collapsed, groaning in pain. Jason had aimed for the leg, just enough to make sure he wouldn't be walking right for a long time. He leaned down, staring Hale in the eyes. "This is me being merciful." Hale whimpered. Jason stood up, turning to Stacy. "Let's go." She exhaled, shaking her head. "You really don't do quiet nights, do you?" Jason grinned. "Where's the fun in that?" They walked out of the warehouse as sirens blared in the distance. Victor Hale was finished. And Jason Statham? He was just getting started. The end.